In my family, there were 2 daughters, but only one was treated like a precious, flawless diamond. That was my younger sister, Olivia. The rest of us, my parents and I, were just the velvet-lined box she came in. The setting designed to make her sparkle. Olivia was the golden child. She was beautiful, she was charming, and she had a unique talent for getting exactly what she wanted, usually by convincing everyone around her that her wants were, in fact, needs. I, her older sister Ava, was the responsible one, the sensible one, the one with a stable job, a 401k, and a quiet, drama-free life. In my family's eyes, this did not make me a success. It made me the designated adult in the room, the person whose job it was to be practical so that everyone else could be fabulous. This dynamic was never more apparent than when it came to money, and specifically, when it came to my trust fund. If you are the responsible child in your family, you know exactly what I'm talking about. Your siblings' wants are treated like urgent necessities, and your own actual needs are treated like frivolous, inconvenient complaints. It's a special kind of family gaslighting, and it was the air I had been breathing my entire life. So hit that subscribe button if you've ever been told to be more understanding, while your sibling got everything they ever asked for. When I was born, my maternal grandparents, 2 of the most wonderful and sensible people I have ever known, set up an irrevocable trust fund for me. They did the same for Olivia when she was born. It wasn't a massive billion-dollar fortune. It was a significant, but not extravagant, sum of money carefully invested, with one clear purpose to give each of us a head start in our adult lives. It was meant for a down payment on a first home, for a master's degree, or to start a business. It was a rainy day fund, a foundation for a future we would build ourselves. The key word in that trust was irrevocable. My grandparents were smart people. They knew their own daughter, my mother, had a tendency towards the dramatic and the financially frivolous, and they knew my father was a man who could be easily swayed by my mother's whims. So they had their lawyer, a sharp, kind man named Mr. Harrison, set up the trusts in a way that was legally airtight. My parents were named as the trustees, the managers of the funds until we each turned 30. But they were not, under any circumstances, the beneficiaries. They could not touch a dime of that money for themselves. Their legal, fiduciary duty was to protect it, to grow it, and to disperse it to us, and only to us, for its intended purpose. For me, my trust fund was a quiet, comforting presence in the background of my life, a safety net I knew was there, but one I was determined never to need. I worked hard. I put myself through college and got my degree in physical therapy. I lived modestly. I saved my money, and I built my own career. For my parents, my trust fund was a source of constant, low-grade irritation. It was a locked treasure chest in the middle of their living room, and they didn't have the key. And it became even more irritating to them as Olivia grew up. Because while I was saving, Olivia was spending. While I was building a career, Olivia was building a collection of expensive shoes. She was my parents' little princess, and they believed she deserved a life of beauty and ease, a life they themselves couldn't quite afford to give her on their own salaries. The comment started when we were in college. I had asked my parents for a small disbursement from my trust, a few $1,000s, to help buy a reliable used car because my old one had finally died. The process was an ordeal. I had to submit a formal, written request. I had to sit through a 2-hour lecture from my father about fiscal responsibility and the importance of living within one's means. They eventually, reluctantly, approved it, but they made me feel like I had just asked them to sell a kidney. 2 months later, Olivia decided she absolutely needed to spend a semester abroad in Florence to find her artistic muse. My parents didn't have the cash for it, so they took out a second mortgage on their house to pay for her Italian adventure. When I questioned the financial wisdom of this, my mother had sighed her familiar, long-suffering sigh. "It's just not fair." "Ava," she'd said, her voice full of a strange resentment, "you have this huge nest egg just sitting there, waiting for you. Olivia doesn't have that luxury. We have to make sacrifices to give her the kind of beautiful experiences she deserves." I was so stunned. I couldn't even reply. My trust fund, a gift from my grandparents intended for my future, was being reframed as an unfair advantage I held over my own sister. My responsibility was being twisted into a privilege, and her lack of it was being twisted into a burden they had to bear. This was the backdrop of our lives. Me, the sensible, self-sufficient daughter, and Olivia, the beautiful, dazzling, and endlessly expensive golden child. Then, 2 years ago, Olivia met Brandon. Brandon was, in my parents' eyes, the ultimate prize. He was a junior partner at a big law firm. He came from good family, which meant his parents owned a yacht and belonged to the right country club. And he was completely, utterly, besotted with my sister. Their engagement was announced last spring. Olivia flashed a diamond ring so large it looked like a disco ball on her finger. My parents were ecstatic. This was the culmination of their life's work. Their beautiful, perfect daughter was marrying a wealthy, successful man. She was, finally, officially, being elevated to the station in life they had always believed she deserved. And with that engagement came the inevitable next step, the wedding. But not just any wedding. This had to be a wedding worthy of their new, soon-to-be in-laws. A wedding that would announce to the world that their daughter, Olivia, was not just marrying into high society, but that she belonged there. Olivia, of course, had a vision. She had a binder, a thick, 3-ring binder that was a testament to a lifetime of watching fairy tale movies and flipping through bridal magazines. The wedding she had planned was not just a wedding. It was a full-scale, theatrical production. It involved a historic, Gilded Age mansion as the venue, a celebrity floral designer from New York, a 10-piece band, a custom-designed couture gown, a 5-course meal with wine pairings, the estimated budget, which she laid out for us one evening in a PowerPoint presentation she had created, was just shy of $200,000. I watched my father's face as she clicked through the slides of ice sculptures and string quartets. He was a man who prided himself on his financial acumen, and I could see the small muscle in his jaw begin to twitch. He knew, as well as I did, that they did not have $200,000. They had a comfortable retirement, but they were not wealthy, not like that. "Olivia, honey," he began, his voice a little strained. "This is all beautiful, but it is also astronomically expensive. I'm not sure how we can." "But Daddy," Olivia said, her lower lip beginning to tremble in a way that had always worked on him. "It has to be perfect, the Sterlings." That was her fiancé's family name, are used to a certain level of quality. "We can't have a tacky, cheap wedding. What would they think?" The argument went on for an hour. It ended, as all arguments with Olivia did, with her getting her way. My parents, desperate not to be embarrassed in front of their new, wealthy in-laws, agreed to find the money. "Don't you worry, my perfect girl," my mother said, hugging a tearful but triumphant Olivia. "We'll make it happen. You will have the wedding of your dreams. Your father and I will find the money, somehow." As she said it, her eyes flickered over to me. Just for a second. It was a strange, quick, and unreadable glance, but I felt a sudden, cold knot of dread form in the pit of my stomach. I knew my trust fund was untouchable. It was irrevocable. It was legally, absolutely, 100% mine. They couldn't get to it. I knew that. But in that moment, seeing the desperate look on my father's face and the cold, calculating glint in my mother's eye, I felt a new, terrifying thought enter my mind. They were the trustees. They were the managers. And for the first time, I began to wonder just how far they would be willing to go to give their golden child the perfect wedding she deserved. I pushed the thought away. It was too ugly, too monstrous. They were my parents. They would never do something illegal. They would never betray my trust, and my grandparents' trust, like that. But the cold, ugly feeling lingered, and as I drove home that night, I had the distinct, unsettling premonition that the bill for my sister's perfect wedding was, somehow, going to be sent to me. The months leading up to Olivia's wedding were a blur of tulle, cake tastings, and a level of ostentatious planning that would have made Marie Antoinette blush. My sister, the golden child, was in her element. She had a binder, a wedding planner, and a new, imperious tone of voice she used when speaking to vendors. She was no longer just Olivia Archer. She was the future Mrs. Brandon Sterling, and she was determined to make her transition into high society an event that would be spoken about for years. I, as the maid of honor, was expected to be a willing and enthusiastic participant in this grand production. I spent my weekends visiting ridiculously expensive venues, offering my opinion on flower arrangements that cost more than my monthly rent, and feigning excitement over a 5-tiered wedding cake that would require its own structural engineer. Through it all, the question of money was a constant, unspoken tension. I knew my parents couldn't afford this. I knew that the bill for the custom-designed gown alone was more than my father's annual salary. But whenever I would gently broach the subject, my mother would wave her hand dismissively. "Don't you worry about the money, Ava," she'd say with a confident, breezy smile. "Your father and I have it all handled. Your sister deserves a perfect day, and she is going to get one." The other constant was the subtle, but persistent, commentary on my own trust fund. "It's just such a shame your grandparents structured your trust that way," my mother would sigh. As we were looking at a catering proposal that cost as much as a new car, all that money, just sitting there, locked away until you're 30. It seems like such a waste, when Olivia needs it now for something so important. "The trust is for a house, Mom, or for grad school," I would remind her, my voice tight. That's what Grandma and Grandpa wanted. Yes. Well, they're not here to see their other granddaughter get married into one of the city's finest families, are they? She'd reply, her voice sharp. Priorities change. Ava. The serious talk I had been dreading finally came on a Sunday afternoon. 2 months before the wedding, they summoned me to the house. No Olivia, just my mother and father, waiting for me in the living room, their faces arranged in masks of grave, parental concern. "Ava, sit down," my father said, gesturing to the armchair opposite them. He had a thick, official-looking folder on the coffee table in front of him. "Your mother and I have some difficult news to share with you. It's about your trust fund." My heart began to pound a slow, heavy drumbeat. "Here it comes. As you know," he began, his voice the smooth, authoritative tone he used when he was about to deliver bad news to his employees. "Your trust is managed by the investment firm of Sterling and Lynch. They have done a wonderful job for years, but the market has been incredibly volatile lately." He opened the folder. It was full of what looked like official financial statements, with charts and graphs and numbers. "There was a significant downturn in the tech sector last quarter," he said, his voice full of feigned regret. "The firm that manages the trust had a large portion of your assets invested in a single, high-yield tech stock that was supposed to be a sure thing, and then, without warning, the company went bankrupt. A complete and total collapse." He pushed a piece of paper across the table to me. It was a statement from the investment firm, showing a graph with a line that started high on the left and then plummeted into a terrifying, deep chasm on the right. "I'm so sorry, Ava," he said, his voice a low, somber hum. "The trust. It has suffered a catastrophic loss. Over 75% of its value has been wiped out." I stared at the paper. The numbers, the charts, they all seemed to swim before my eyes. My safety net, my future, gone. The feeling was a physical blow, a punch to the gut that left me breathless. But even through the initial, dizzying shock, a small, cold, and deeply suspicious part of my brain began to work. I was a physical therapist, not a financial analyst, but I knew enough to know that a properly managed conservative trust fund doesn't just lose 75% of its value overnight. That's not how it works. "Which stock?" I asked, my voice a whisper. "What was the company?" "It's all very complex. Honey," my mother said quickly, her hand fluttering nervously. "Financial jargon you wouldn't understand." "And why wasn't I notified?" I pressed. Looking at my father, "You are the trustees. Weren't you informed that the fund was being invested so aggressively in a single, high-risk stock?" "We were just as shocked as you are," my father said smoothly, his face a mask of believable outrage. "The fund managers have a great deal of discretion. It's all in the fine print of the trust agreement. Our hands were tied. It's a tragedy. A complete and utter tragedy. They had an answer for everything. They were gaslighting me, using my own financial ignorance as a weapon against me, making me feel like my logical questions were naive and foolish." I sat there, stunned into silence, my mind reeling. The timing was just too perfect. The problem of how to pay for Olivia's fairy tale wedding had just been magically, if tragically, solved. And then my mother delivered the final, killing blow. She reached out and took my hand, her eyes full of a terrible, false sympathy. "Now, honey," she began, her voice soft and cloying, "we know this is a terrible shock, and we know it must seem so unfair, but your father and I have been talking, and we have to think about what is fair for the whole family." I knew what was coming. I could see the words forming on her lips before she even spoke them. "Your trust fund is much smaller now, of course," my father chimed in, consulting another fabricated document. "After the losses, there's only about $60,000 left. And your sister, Olivia, has nothing. She is starting her new life with a wonderful man, and she has no nest egg at all. It's just not fair." "Ava," my mother said, her lower lip trembling, "that you should have this money, small as it is, while your sister has nothing to her name. It's not what your grandparents would have wanted. They would have wanted to see both of their granddaughters happy." She squeezed my hand. "So, your father and I, as the trustees of the fund, have made an executive decision. We believe the only fair and loving thing to do, the thing your grandparents would have truly wanted, is to use the remaining funds to give Olivia the beautiful wedding she deserves. It will be a wedding gift. From the whole family, from all of us." I just stared at her. The audacity of it, the sheer, magnificent, evil brilliance of their lie. They had invented a financial catastrophe, and were now using that catastrophe as a justification to steal what was left of my inheritance and give it to their golden child. And they were framing it as an act of love, an act of fairness. "You still have your wonderful, stable job, dear," she continued, her voice now bright and cheerful. "The crisis having been averted, you'll be fine. But this is a once-in-a-lifetime moment for your sister, and we are going to make it perfect for her." I was so stunned, so completely outnumbered and outmaneuvered, that I couldn't even speak. I just sat there, numb, as they laid out their plans for spending my money. They would use it for the venue deposit, for the couture gown, for the celebrity florist. They spoke of it as if it were a done deal, because in their minds, it was. My silence was my consent. I left their house that day with the folder of fake financial statements in my hand. I felt like a victim of a very polite, very well-mannered, and very loving mugging. They had not just stolen from me, they had done it with a smile, and told me it was for my own good, for the good of the family. I sat in my car in their driveway for a long time, the rain beginning to fall outside. The story they had told me, it didn't add up. The numbers didn't make sense. The timing was too perfect. My grief and my shock were real. But underneath it all, the small, cold, and stubborn seed of suspicion was growing. They thought I was a fool. They thought I would just accept their story, that I would just passively allow them to take what was mine. But I was my grandparents' granddaughter, and they had not raised me to be a doormat. I pulled out my phone. My hands were shaking, but not from grief anymore. It was from a new, cold, and unfamiliar rage. I was not going to let them get away with this. I needed to know the truth. And there was only one person in the world who could tell me. The one person my parents had not counted on. The one person who had been there at the very beginning. I scrolled through my contacts until I found his name, a name I hadn't called in years. Mr. Harrison, my grandfather's lawyer, the man who had set up the trust, the man who knew all of its secrets. I pressed the call button, and in that moment, I went from being a victim to being an investigator, and the hunt for the truth had just begun. The drive to Mr. Harrison's office was a blur of righteous fury. I clutched the folder of fake financial statements my parents had given me as if it were a holy text, a Bible of their lies. The woman who had numbly accepted their story just a day before was gone. In her place was a daughter who had been pushed too far, a woman with a singular, burning purpose to find the truth. Mr. Harrison's office was a quiet sanctuary of old-world dignity, a stark contrast to the loud, gaudy drama of my family. He greeted me with a warm, sad hug. He had been my grandparents' lawyer for 40 years. He had known me since I was a little girl. "I was so sorry to hear about your father, Ava," he said, his voice full of genuine kindness as he led me into his book-lined office. "Thank you, Mr. Harrison," I said. "I'm afraid I'm not here about my father's will. I'm here about my grandparents' will, specifically, my trust fund." I sat down in the heavy leather chair opposite his desk, and I told him everything. I told him about Olivia's ridiculously expensive wedding plans. I told him about my parents' pressure. And I told him about the serious talk, where they had informed me that my trust had suffered a catastrophic loss. I pushed the folder of forged documents across his polished desk. "They told me the fund lost 75% of its value overnight," I said. Watching his face, "They said this is all that's left." He picked up the top sheet. A professionally printed statement showing a graph with a terrifying downward plummet. He looked at it for a long moment, his kind face slowly hardening into a mask of grim disbelief. Then, a small, dry, humorless smile touched his lips. "Ava," he said, his voice quiet but laced with steel, "your grandfather was a brilliant man, but he was, above all, a cautious man. He structured your trust to be a fortress. The portfolio is invested in the most stable, conservative, low-yield index funds on the market. It is virtually impossible for it to lose 75% of its value unless the entire global economy ceased to exist." He looked at me over the top of his glasses. "What your parents are describing is not a market downturn. My dear, it is a siege, and I have a very strong suspicion that it was an inside job." The validation in his words was so powerful, so absolute, that I felt a wave of relief wash over me. I wasn't crazy. I wasn't being paranoid. My gut had been right all along. He picked up the phone on his desk. He didn't ask for my permission. He was my grandfather's man. And he was now my protector. "Judith," he said to his assistant, "get me John Carmichael at Sterling and Lynch on the line, now." John Carmichael was the senior investment manager who handled my trust, within a minute. He was on the speakerphone. "Marcus," the voice on the other end said, "good to hear from you. I was so sorry to hear about Richard Vance, a fine man." "Indeed," Mr. Harrison said. "John, I'm calling about the trust Richard and his wife set up for their granddaughter, Ava Vance. I have Ava here in my office. We are reviewing a recent statement, and we have some questions." "Of course," Carmichael said. "How can I help?" "Well, John," Mr. Harrison said, his voice dangerously smooth, "the statement Ava has in her possession, dated last month, shows a catastrophic loss in the tech sector, resulting in a 75% devaluation of the principal. Can you confirm that?" There was a long, confused silence on the other end of the line. "A loss," Carmichael finally said, his voice full of bafflement. "Marcus, what are you talking about? The Vance Trust hasn't lost a thing. In fact, it's had a very healthy 6% growth this year. It's a conservative portfolio. It doesn't have catastrophic losses." I just closed my eyes. A single, hot tear of pure, vindicated rage sliding down my cheek. It was a lie, a complete and utter fabrication. "That's not what my copy of the statement says," Mr. Harrison said coolly. "Well then, your copy is wrong," Carmichael said, a new, worried edge to his voice. "The official statement I have in front of me shows the trust's value at just over $280,000. The only major recent activity was a single, lump sum disbursement, a withdrawal, authorized by both trustees, Richard and Carol Vance, 3 weeks ago." "A withdrawal?" Mr. Harrison asked, his voice still calm, but I could see the muscle in his jaw tighten. "How much?" $200,000, exactly," Carmichael said. $200,000, the exact budget for Olivia's wedding. "And can you trace that wire transfer?" Mr. Harrison asked. "Where did it go?" I could hear the clicking of a keyboard on the other end of the line. "Just a moment, here it is." The $200,000 was wired directly to an event planning company, a company called Ever After Weddings. Ever After Weddings, my sister's ridiculously expensive wedding planner. My parents hadn't just lied. They had stolen my entire future, my grandparents' legacy, and they had handed it over to a wedding planner to pay for canapés and ice sculptures for my golden sister. "Thank you, John," Mr. Harrison said, his voice like ice. "Please have the original, official statements for the past 6 months, along with a copy of the wire transfer authorization, couriered to my office immediately." He hung up the phone. The silence in the room was deafening. Mr. Harrison stood up and walked to the window, looking out over the city. "What your parents have done," he said, his back to me, "is a profound criminal breach of their fiduciary duty as trustees. It is theft. It is fraud. We can sue them, and we will win. Without a shadow of a doubt. We can have them removed as trustees, and we can likely have the funds returned." "I want to do it," I said, my voice shaking with a cold fury. "I want to sue them." "We can," he said, turning back to me, "but there is another, perhaps more elegant path. A path your grandfather, a man who loved the beautiful, inescapable logic of mathematics, would have appreciated." He sat back down at his desk. "Ava," he said, a new, clever glint in his eye, "your parents, in their arrogance, have done something incredibly stupid. They have disguised this theft as a gift from the family to Olivia for her wedding." "Yes," I said, "they told me they were giving her the remaining money." "A $200,000 gift," he said, a slow smile spreading across his face. "That is a very, very generous gift. And the United States government, specifically the Internal Revenue Service, is very, very interested in generous gifts." He then proceeded to explain to me the beautiful, wonderful, and for my parents, utterly devastating, intricacies of the federal gift tax. He explained that any individual can give another individual a certain amount each year, currently about $18,000, tax-free, but any amount over that is subject to a gift tax, a significant tax, up to 40%. "So," he said, pulling out a calculator, "on a $200,000 gift, after the exclusions, the tax liability owed to the federal government would be somewhere in the neighborhood of $72,000. I just stared at him. "And to pay this tax," he continued, clearly enjoying himself, "the giver of the gift in this case, your parents, acting as trustees, are legally required to file a Form 709 gift tax return with the IRS." He looked at me over the top of his glasses. "Now, Ava," he said, "you know your parents. Do you think, for one single, solitary second, that they have filed a gift tax return for the $200,000 they secretly, illegally took from your trust and gave to your sister for her wedding?" I thought about my parents, about their arrogance, their belief that they were above the rules, and I started to laugh. "No," I said, "not a chance in hell." "Exactly," he said, his smile turning into a predatory grin. "They think they are clever. They think they have moved money from one family member to another, and no one will be the wiser. They have no idea that they have just committed a serious federal offense, felony tax evasion." He leaned forward. "So, we have a choice. We can file a messy, private, family lawsuit to get your money back. Or," he let the word hang in the air, "or we can make a simple, quiet, and completely anonymous phone call to the IRS whistleblower office." The beauty of it, the sheer, perfect, poetic justice of it, it was breathtaking. A lawsuit would be a family drama. An IRS audit, that was a bureaucratic nightmare. It was cold. It was impersonal. It was inescapable. It wasn't me punishing them. It was the United States government holding them accountable for their own stupidity and greed. It was a weapon my father, the logical, pragmatic accountant, would have been terrified of, and it was a weapon my grandfather, the quiet lover of elegant solutions, would have adored. I looked at Mr. Harrison, my heart pounding with a new, thrilling sense of power. "So when we call," I asked, "do we have to give them our names?" Mr. Harrison's grin widened. "Not at all," he said. "The IRS loves an anonymous tip, especially one that comes with bank statements, wire transfer records, and the names of all the wedding vendors who received the untaxed funds." He turned his computer monitor towards me. On the screen was the official IRS whistleblower submission form. The trap was no longer just an idea. It was a government-issued document, and the fuse was about to be lit. I looked across the mahogany desk at Mr. Harrison, the IRS whistleblower form glowing on his computer screen between us. His question hung in the air, a choice between two very different kinds of justice: a private family lawsuit or a quiet, anonymous tip that would unleash the full, impersonal, and inescapable power of the federal government upon my family. For a moment, I pictured the lawsuit, The messy, emotional depositions. The family drama playing out for years in quiet, private legal chambers. It would be a fight, and I would win. But it would be a fight on their terms, a fight of feelings and accusations, a fight they could twist into a narrative of a bitter, greedy daughter trying to ruin her perfect sister's happiness. But a tax audit. That was different. A tax audit had no emotion. It had no narrative. It was just numbers. It was a cold, hard, and logical consequence for a cold, hard, and logical crime. It was a weapon my father, the accountant, would understand and fear. It was a weapon my grandfather, the mathematician, would have admired for its elegant, brutal efficiency. "Let's do it," I said, my voice clear and firm. "Let's make the anonymous tip." A slow, deeply satisfied smile spread across Mr. Harrison's face. "An excellent choice, Ava," he said, poetic, even. The next 2 weeks were spent not in anger, but in meticulous, cold preparation, Mr. Harrison, with the righteous fury of a lawyer whose favorite client's wishes had been so thoroughly defiled, was a force of nature. He used his legal authority as the administrator of my grandfather's trust to gather every last piece of evidence we would need. We compiled a digital dossier, a perfect, airtight case file for the IRS. It contained the original trust documents, clearly stating its irrevocable nature and me as the sole beneficiary, the forged financial statements my parents had given me to justify the market loss, the real, official statements from the investment firm showing the $200,000 withdrawal, and the wire transfer confirmation, showing my inheritance being sent directly to ever after weddings. But we didn't stop there. Mr. Harrison's office then subpoenaed the full, itemized invoices from every single one of Olivia's wedding vendors, the $10,000 deposit for the historic mansion venue, the $20,000 bill from the celebrity florist, the $15,000 invoice for my sister's custom-designed couture gown. We had the entire paper trail, a detailed accounting of exactly how they had spent my stolen future on a single day of extravagant, narcissistic fantasy. The final step was to file the report. We sat together in his office and filled out the IRS Form 211, the official application for award for original information. It felt so bureaucratic, so deliciously, devastatingly mundane, under the section for description of the alleged tax law violation. We laid out the case with cold, legal precision. We detailed the illegal withdrawal from an irrevocable trust. We detailed the undeclared gift of $200,000 from the trustees, my parents, to the beneficiary, my sister, Olivia. We detailed their clear and deliberate attempt to commit felony gift tax evasion. We attached our entire digital dossier of evidence, every document, every invoice, every bank statement. It was a perfect, undeniable, and utterly damning package. "And now for the timing," Mr. Harrison said, his finger hovering over the submit button. "The wedding is on June 14th. The IRS is a slow-moving beast, but a tip this detailed. With this much evidence, we'll get their attention quickly. If we file it today, my best guess is that the initial notice of audit will be generated and sent out in about 6 to 8 weeks." He did a quick calculation in his head, right around the second week of June. Perfect. He looked at me. "One last time. Are you sure about this? Ava, once we press this button, there is no going back. This will likely destroy your family." I thought about my parents and the casual cruelty of their betrayal. I thought about my sister and her lifetime of entitled selfishness. And I thought about my grandparents and their legacy of hard work and integrity that my parents had been so willing to set on fire to pay for a champagne fountain. "They destroyed the family, Mr. Harrison," I said quietly. "I'm just delivering the bill." He nodded, and he clicked the button. A small, simple message appeared on the screen. "Thank you. Your information has been successfully submitted to the Internal Revenue Service." A silent digital bomb had just been launched, and it was set to detonate on my sister's wedding day. The 2 months leading up to the wedding were a masterclass in my own acting abilities. I had to continue playing the part of the defeated, heartbroken, and slightly pathetic older sister. I had to watch, with a serene, sad smile, as Olivia's dream wedding, funded by my stolen inheritance, came together. The first test was her bridal shower. It was a lavish affair held at my parents' country club, a sea of pastel dresses and expensive gifts. My mother gave a speech, her voice full of tears, about how wonderful it was that they were able to give her perfect Olivia the perfect start to her new life. I had to sit there and clap politely. So there I was, at my sister's ridiculously expensive bridal shower, watching her open a $1,000 espresso machine, paid for with my money, all while my mother gave a speech about the importance of family generosity. And I just had to smile and clap along. All I could think was, I hope you enjoy that espresso machine. Olivia, it will probably be the last nice thing you own for a very long time. If you've ever had to smile through a family event while secretly plotting their downfall, you are my kind of person. My own gift was modest, thoughtful, and deeply ironic. I gave her a beautiful, leather-bound financial planning journal to help you and Brandon plan your new future together, I said with a sweet smile. She accepted it with a look of confused, pitying thanks. She had no idea. The final hurdle was the rehearsal dinner. The night before the wedding, it was held at an expensive downtown restaurant. The atmosphere was thick with triumphant, self-congratulatory joy. My family believed they had pulled it off. They had secured their daughter's social standing. They had funded it with my own money, and they had faced zero consequences. They were at the absolute peak of their arrogance. My father, flushed with wine and self-importance, pulled me aside. "You see, Ava," he said, putting a heavy hand on my shoulder, "everything worked out for the best. Your sister is so happy. Look at her. This is what matters. Family." "You're right, Dad," I said, looking at my sister, who was laughing, showing off her massive diamond ring. "She does look happy." He beamed, completely misreading my quiet, cold tone. "I knew you'd understand eventually," he said. "You're a good daughter." I went to bed that night in the guest room of my parents' house, the same room I had stayed in as a child. I lay there in the dark, listening to the sounds of my family celebrating downstairs, and I felt no anger, no sadness, just a profound quiet and deeply unsettling calm. It was the calm of a clear, cold sky on the morning of a battle. The waiting was over. Tomorrow was the day. Tomorrow. The bill for this entire, extravagant, fraudulent production would finally arrive, and it would be delivered by the United States government. I fell asleep dreaming of the beautiful, karmic, and inevitable chaos that was about to unfold. The day of my sister's wedding was a spectacle of breathtaking, unapologetic excess. I stood in my pale lilac maid of honor dress, a dress Olivia had chosen for me, and watched the chaos unfold with the serene, detached calm of a documentary filmmaker. Every flower arrangement, every crystal glass, every bottle of vintage champagne was a testament to my family's crime. It was the most beautiful, most expensive crime scene I had ever witnessed. The morning was a blur of hairspray and mimosas. Olivia was in her element, a radiant, beaming bridezilla, issuing commands to the small army of hairstylists, makeup artists, and frantic bridesmaids who orbited around her. She was incandescently happy. It was the happiest I had ever seen her. And it was all funded by a lie, all funded by me. "Ava, sweetie, be a dear and fetch me another mimosa. Would you?" she called out from her throne in the makeup chair. "And don't let them be stingy with the champagne." "Of course, Olivia," I said with a pleasant smile. I had to admit, she looked stunning. Her custom-designed couture gown, the one that cost $15,000 of my grandparents' legacy, was a masterpiece of lace and silk. As my mother carefully fastened the long string of pearls around her neck, a gift from the groom's family, I felt a strange, hollow pang in my chest. It wasn't jealousy. It was a deep, profound sadness for what my family had become. They had traded their integrity for this, for a single day of playing dress-up in a world they didn't belong to. The ceremony took place in the grand ballroom of a historic downtown hotel. It was a beautiful, solemn affair. I stood beside my sister at the altar, holding her heavy bouquet of imported orchids, and I listened as the officiant spoke of love, of trust, of honesty, of the sacred bond of family. The irony was so thick, so suffocating. I thought I might actually choke on it. I looked out at the guests, On one side sat the groom's family, the Sterlings, a clan of wealthy, respectable, old money lawyers and doctors. On the other side sat our family, my parents beaming with a pride that was completely fraudulent. They looked like they belonged. They had successfully purchased their ticket into this world, and the price had been my future. As Olivia and Brandon exchanged their vows, my mother caught my eye from the front pew and gave me a small, tearful, happy smile. A smile that said, "See, it was all worth it. Look at the beautiful thing we were able to give your sister." I just smiled back, my face a perfect, placid mask. Just wait, I thought. The bill is coming. The reception was held in an even grander ballroom, one with towering ceilings and chandeliers that glittered like captive galaxies. The 10-piece band was playing, the champagne was flowing. My father, in his rented tuxedo, was holding court, laughing with Brandon's father, looking every inch the proud father of the bride. The toasts were, as I expected, insufferable. My father stood up, his face flushed with champagne and pride. He gave a long, rambling speech about his perfect daughter, Olivia. He spoke of her beauty, her charm, her unwavering spirit. As a father, he said, his voice thick with emotion, all you ever want is for your children to be happy and secure. And today, seeing my beautiful daughter marry into such a fine family, knowing that her future is so bright, it is the proudest day of my life. My wife and I, we have always believed in giving our children the very best, in providing for our own, no matter the cost. He looked over at my mother, who was dabbing at her eyes. And I think, looking around this beautiful room tonight, we can all agree that we succeeded. The room erupted in applause. I stood and raised my glass with everyone else, the toast a bitter acid in my throat. The party continued, the band played, the guests danced, and I watched. I was a quiet observer, a ghost at the feast, waiting for the final act to begin. It happened around 10 o'clock, just as the waiters were preparing to serve the massive, 7-tiered wedding cake. I saw him first. He was not a guest. He did not fit in. He was a man in his late 40s, with a tired face and a cheap, ill-fitting, polyester suit. He stood by the entrance to the ballroom, his eyes scanning the crowd. He looked like what he was, a government employee at a party he was not invited to. He spoke quietly to one of the wedding planners, who then, with a worried expression, made her way to the head table and whispered something in my father's ear. I watched my father's face. He looked annoyed at the interruption. He waved a dismissive hand, as if to shoo the planner away. But she persisted, her expression now urgent. He finally sighed, threw his napkin down on the table, and followed her towards the back of the room. I saw him greet the man in the cheap suit with a look of impatient irritation. They spoke for a few moments. I couldn't hear their words, only the loud, cheerful music from the band. But I could see my father's face, and I watched, with a kind of slow motion, clinical detachment, as it completely, utterly, and irrevocably fell apart. It was a beautiful thing to witness. The smug, self-satisfied confidence drained away, like water from a shattered glass. The flushed, ruddy color of champagne and pride was replaced by a ghastly, pasty, grayish-white. His eyes, which had been shining with triumph just moments before, went wide with a dawning, spectacular horror. His mouth fell slightly open. He began to sweat, a thin sheen of perspiration instantly appearing on his brow. He looked like a man who had just been told that the world was ending, and that it was entirely his fault. He stumbled back a step, his hand coming up to brace himself against a wall. The man in the cheap suit just nodded politely, handed my father a business card and a thick, official-looking envelope, and then he turned and walked away as quietly as he had arrived. The entire exchange took less than 2 minutes. My father stood by the wall, staring at the envelope in his hand as if it were a live serpent. The wedding planner was trying to speak to him, but he didn't seem to hear her. He was a man in a state of profound, catastrophic shock. My mother, noticing his absence, came looking for him. "Richard." "What is it? They're about to cut the cake," she said, her voice a little sharp. Then she saw his face. "Richard, are you all right? You look like you've seen a ghost." He didn't answer. He just held out the envelope to her, his hand trembling violently, She took it, she opened it, and I watched as her face went through the same beautiful, terrible transformation as his. The news began to spread through the party, not as a loud announcement, but as a quiet, poisonous whisper. "What happened to Richard Archer? He looks like he's having a heart attack." I heard that man was from the government. The IRS. Someone said something about the IRS. The celebratory atmosphere in the room began to die. The laughter became strained. The music seemed to falter. A cold, ugly unease began to creep through the opulent ballroom, extinguishing the joy like a slow gas leak. My sister's wedding was supposed to be the event of the season, a party that people would talk about for years. And it was, just not for the reasons she had hoped. Her something borrowed was my trust fund. Her something blue was about to be the color of the ink on a federal subpoena. She was on the dance floor, momentarily oblivious, surrounded by her bridesmaids. But then she must have sensed the change in the room. She stopped dancing, her smiling face turning to one of confusion. She saw her parents, huddled in the corner, their faces masks of gray terror. "Mom, Dad," she called out, walking towards them. "What's wrong? It's time to cut the cake." My mother looked up at her perfect, beautiful, golden daughter, in her $15,000 couture gown. And the look on my mother's face was one of pure, unadulterated despair. The perfect wedding, the perfect party, the perfect start to her perfect new life. It was all over. It had all turned to ash. I sat at my table in the corner, and I took a slow, deliberate sip of my champagne. It tasted like victory. I had never said a word. I had never made a threat. I had simply let them be who they were, and their own greed, their own arrogance, their own criminal stupidity had been their undoing. I thought about my grandparents. I thought about the trust they had left me, a gift of love and security. And I thought about the other, more important thing they had given me: a sense of integrity, a sense of right and wrong. My parents had stolen my inheritance, so I had given them a tax bill they would never, ever forget. It felt, to me, like a perfectly fair trade. I didn't stay to watch the cake get cut. I didn't stay for the first dance that would never happen. As the first panicked, horrified whispers began to ripple through the wedding reception, turning my sister's perfect day into a thick, choking cloud of scandal and fear. I quietly stood up from my table in the back. I placed my champagne flute, still full, down on the white linen tablecloth, and without a word to anyone, I turned and walked away. I walked out of the opulent ballroom, past the stunned guests who were now huddled in small, gossiping clusters. I walked past the 7-tiered wedding cake, a magnificent, white monument to my stolen inheritance. And I walked out the grand hotel doors and into the cool, clean night air. I didn't run. I didn't need to. I felt a profound sense of calm, of quiet, and of finality. The bomb I had so carefully planted had detonated, and I had no desire to stay and survey the wreckage. I had done my part. The rest, I knew, was up to the slow, grinding, and inescapable gears of the United States government. The aftermath was not a loud explosion, but a slow, methodical demolition. Mr. Harrison kept me updated on the proceedings, his voice a mixture of professional satisfaction and grim sympathy. The wedding reception, he told me, had imploded in on itself. The news of a federal tax audit, delivered by a real-life IRS agent in the middle of the party, had been a social nuclear bomb. The groom's wealthy family, the Sterlings, had made a hasty and very public exit, their faces masks of cold fury and humiliation. The party had been over before the band had even had a chance to play Celebration. The IRS, as Mr. Harrison had predicted, was not a forgiving adversary. The anonymous tip, backed by the mountain of evidence we had provided, had triggered a full-scale, top-priority audit of my parents' and my sister's finances for the past 7 years. They were not just looking at the undeclared $200,000 gift. They were looking at everything. It turned out, my parents' financial house was a flimsy shack built on a foundation of quiet, long-term tax creativity. The IRS investigators, armed with our tip, found years of undeclared income from my father's side, consulting work, questionable deductions, and a general pattern of what they politely called aggressive accounting. But the centerpiece of their case, the unforgivable sin, was the gift tax evasion. The final bill, when it arrived 6 months later, was a masterpiece of bureaucratic destruction. Mr. Harrison walked me through the numbers. There was the initial tax owed on the $200,000 gift, a sum of nearly $72,000. Then came the penalties for failure to file, which were substantial. And then came the interest, compounded daily, and on top of that came the back taxes and penalties for all the other little bits of fraud they had uncovered along the way. The final number was just shy of $500,000. It was a crippling, life-destroying sum. To pay it, my parents were forced to liquidate their entire world. They had to sell their beloved country club home, the one they had worked their whole lives for. They had to cash in their retirement accounts, their stock portfolios, everything they had built. The entire foundation of their smug, superior lifestyle was gone, devoured by the consequences of their own greed. They were left with nothing but a small rental apartment in a town an hour away, and the bitter taste of their own foolishness. And Olivia, my golden sister, her fairy tale marriage to Brandon Sterling had started not with a honeymoon in the Maldives, but with her new husband's family lawyers having to deal with the public relations nightmare of being associated with a family under federal investigation for tax fraud. Her marriage survived, but it was forever tainted. She had gotten her perfect wedding, but she had paid for it with her family's ruin and her own reputation. They tried to contact me, of course. My mother left a series of long, rambling, and increasingly desperate voicemails. They were arias of self-pity, of blame, of rage. She called me a snake, a traitor, an ungrateful child who had destroyed her own family. She never once, not for a single second, took any responsibility for her own actions. I listened to the first one, and then I deleted them all without listening. And I blocked her number for good. My father. My brother, My ex-brother-in-law, I blocked them all. I was done. The performance was over. I was finally, truly free. A year has passed. My life today is quiet, it is peaceful, and it is my own. After the dust had settled, Mr. Harrison had helped me take legal control of my own trust fund. The $60,000 that was supposedly left after the market crash was, of course, still there, along with the $200,000 my parents had stolen. After paying Mr. Harrison's legal fees, I was left with a significant and very real rainy day fund, my grandparents' final gift. I didn't go on a spending spree. I didn't buy a new car or a fancy wardrobe. I continued to live my simple, quiet life, but the knowledge of that safety net, that foundation beneath me, changed everything. It gave me a new confidence, a new sense of security, and I used it to build something. I still work as a physical therapist. I love my job. I love helping people heal. But now, I do it on my own terms. 2 days a week. I run a small pro bono clinic out of a community center downtown. I offer free physical therapy services to low-income families, to elderly people on fixed incomes, to people who, like me, have had their lives upended by circumstances beyond their control. I am using the legacy my grandparents gave me to provide a different kind of safety net for others. It is the most fulfilling work I have ever done. I think often about what my parents' betrayal taught me. They were so obsessed with the appearance of wealth, with the performance of a certain kind of life, that they were willing to sacrifice their own integrity, their own daughter, to achieve it. They coveted the money in my trust, but they had no understanding of its true value. The real inheritance my grandparents left me wasn't the money. It was the values they had instilled in me: honesty, hard work, integrity. My parents had access to the money, but they had rejected the values. I chose the values, and in doing so, I had not only protected the money, but I had found my own, true worth. My revenge was not loud, it was not emotional. It was a quiet, bureaucratic, and inescapable consequence. I did not ruin them. I simply got out of the way and let them ruin themselves. I held up a mirror, and they were destroyed by their own reflection. It was, I think, a return on investment that my practical, sensible grandfather would have truly appreciated. So, thank you for listening to my story. If there is anyone in your life who puts a price tag on love, who values appearances over integrity, who tries to make you feel small so they can feel big, Remember this: you hold your own worth. It is not something that can be given to you, and it is not something that can be taken away. Hit that subscribe button if you believe in the quiet, devastating power of karmic justice and the Internal Revenue Service. And remember, the best revenge isn't getting even, it's getting free, and building a life so full of purpose and peace that their small, greedy world doesn't even register as a dot in your rearview mirror.